Hello and welcome to The Hearing, our music review show here on the channel. I'm John.
And I'm Scotto.
And without any further ado, on to this week's album, which is from 2014, Seeds by TV on the Radio. TV on the Radio is an American indie rock band from Brooklyn, New York, formed in 2001. For most of the band's existence, the core lineup featured Tunde Adebimpe and I'm guessing on that pronunciation, I apologize if it's off. I'm going to be using the name a lot. On vocals and loops, David Andrew Sitek on guitars, keyboards, and loops, Kip Malone on vocals, guitars, bass, and loops, and Jaleel Bunton on drums, vocals, loops, and guitars as official members. Gerard Smith, bass and keyboards, was in the band from 2005 until his death in 2011. Seeds is the band's fifth studio album, and it was released on November 18th, 2014 through Harvest Records. It's their first album since Gerard Smith's death in 2011. It was recorded in LA at guitarist Dave Sitek's Federal Prism recording studios. I like that. Sitek also produced the album. Lead singer Tunde Adebimpe explained, it was nice to be somewhere where we're not exactly on the clock and worried about how much everything is costing you. It's pretty much the same situation as when we started making music. The album features the aforementioned lineup of Tunde Adebimpe, Kip Malone, David Andrew Sitek, and James Button, as well as a host of guest musicians. I'm going to try to list them all.
Oh, really?
Katrina Ford on vocals, Eleanor Everdell on vocals, David Bergander on drums, Yoshi Takamasa on percussion, Stuart Bogie on sax and horns, Colin Stetson on sax, Matada Roberts on sax and clarinet, Leah Paul on horns, Eric Biondo on trumpet, Aaron Johnson on trombone, Martin Perna on flute, Claudia Chopek on violins and strings, Janice Shen on strings, Claudia Serpa on strings, Laura Hicks on violin, Eleanor Norton on cello, and Priscilla on vocals. I'm glad nobody had a challenging name.
I'm impressed that you went all the way with that. I thought you were going to back
at the
out.
last minute, I wasn't sure. We were talking about it before recording. I wasn't sure, but I do like to credit everybody if I can. The list on Love This Giant was just ridiculous, so I couldn't do that. But this one wasn't quite that bad. Anyway, on to the tracks. Quick reminder, I don't edit any of the songs into the video, but there will be links to the album on Spotify and possibly YouTube. I haven't looked for it on YouTube yet.
You just don't have the money to be sued or anything.
Yeah,
so,
down in the description, so you can listen along with us there. On to track one, Quartz. This one started interesting. It kind of started mid-recording with the background loop.
I've only listened to this album on Spotify ever, so I was like wondering if every version sounds like that, where it's just, it's kind of like... I think
it was intentional, because there's this background sample of this kind of chanting that clearly just kicks in like it was just started in the middle of the recording.
Right, and this, obviously you can see this is a very eclectic band.
Oh, yeah.
But this album pretty much doesn't sound like, for the most part, does not sound like the stuff they've done in the past. It was
okay, I'll have to check out their other stuff then.
There's like a couple tracks that we get later in the album that are like, okay, this is more like what they do.
So the more rock stuff is more their style.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, we begin with just this very unusual, even for them,
kind of like
down,
kind of chanting, and there's this sample that sounds like like tapping on a bottle. Sorry about that.
Right, just random percussion-y stuff, and different vocals, and just all these things happening at once.
And the lead vocal kind of reminded me of Peter Gabriel.
Yes.
You've noticed that, okay?
Oh, yes.
It's a soul melody. It's very much a soul song with this weird sample, but he's got this kind of just this Gabriel-esque sort of that sort of I don't want to say whining, but that sort of weeping tone that Gabriel gets.
Right, and like the last track on this album is like totally something Gabriel. I mean, there's even like stuff where he does like a lower kind of thing that you hear with his voice that Gabriel has done many, many times in
Uh,
his catalog.
and that opening sample kind of went on surprisingly long. It just kind of
Yeah,
stays behind this melody.
it
So when it
actually
gets
turns out to be the entire
yeah,
song. You're kind of
when it
expecting it to like kick.
it gets to this kind of chimey chorus, which was a very nice change of pace. It was interesting. But then they go into verse two and they in the bridge and they just kind of add sounds to that existing
Right,
backup.
right. You get like a brief appearance by with some drums, but I mean, it's mostly the synth and the bass line going on there,
Well,
and
it's not
that's
even
it.
I think it's just everybody's credited with loops, so it's
Okay.
probably just a loop. It's just a sequence.
And I just got into this younger artist named Mitski.
Oh, I've heard some of her stuff. She's in my library. I've been meaning to go back.
She and wow, the influence from Saint Vincent on her, but
Okay.
she also, of course, has was heavily influenced by this too. Like you could hear, like in fact, like one of the songs on her last album begins almost in the same exact way,
Oh
like
wow.
like sampling,
Mhm.
that they're using here.
Speaking of Saint Vincent, I think Mitski's going to be another case like Saint Vincent. I've heard a couple of songs. I kind of like them, but I have yet to really do a deep dive. But I think once I do, I'm gonna be a fan.
Well, I'm just starting with with the single she's put out now and like the last album. I'm gonna
Mhm.
see her. I'm seeing her live
Oh
in
wow.
October, I think.
She ended up on recommended to me because of somebody I'd listened to, probably Yannicka, sorry,
I
because they led
have
to a lot of other bands that I listen to now.
I have
Anyway,
Mrs. Scotto to thank for it. She's
oh,
like, I like this artist. She's in town. Can we go see her? I'm
nice.
like, I've never really heard of her, but okay. So then I go and listen. I'm like, what the fuck? This sounds like Nile Rodgers and Steve Hackett put like a
Oh wow, yeah, yeah, I can see it.
did a collaboration with Saint Vincent.
All right, on to track two, "Careful You." This has a really nice, very 80s style groove with
Right.
this nice thick synth bass.
Yeah. And this yeah. Or is that a synth bass or is that a distortion
No, that's a
just
sequencer.
applied to a reel?
That's a sequencer. That somebody hit a button on a keyboard and it just played, and they just hit a button every time it changes key.
But man,
So,
that's a funky sound.
oh yeah, it's a great sound, very classic, and it's again it's another classic soul vocal. Very his
Yeah,
a lot of his vocals would have worked perfectly in the '60s,
definitely. Oh yeah.
and
I was trying to like figure out a quick way of describing these guys, and it's same with like Ted Leo. Like how what do you what where would you put him in? Kind of like I'm thinking like The Cure with like a soul singer in front instead.
interesting. Yeah, I'm just wait till the end of the show when you hear my description of next week's artist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can hear the Cure. And obviously with not quite not Marvin Gaye, not quite, not a little lower than Marvin
No,
Gaye.
I wouldn't say
Um,
Marvin Gaye.
like
Well, no, there's some parts where he kind of hits that. I
yeah,
mean, but yeah,
not
there's
Sam Cooke. That's what I'm trying to think of.
plenty
He's
of
very Sam
classic
Cooke.
soul singers.
Yeah,
What?
he's very Sam Cooke. That's who I was trying to think of.
Oh yeah, that's it. Right there. Yeah, Sam Cooke.
And I love the echo and the snare. Of course, I have to talk about percussion. And the juxtaposition in the lyrics of "Care for You" and "Careful You."
Yes.
I love how they mix those two.
He does on this one in particular album particularly, he does a lot of wordplay where you're like if you're just listening to it, not listening carefully, you're thinking he's saying just kind of platitudes or
Mhm.
whatever. And then you look at what the actual lyric is, you're like, wait a minute. I see you praying on the dance floor. What's that mean?
EY or AY?
Pray, yeah.
Okay.
Well, you think he's saying like, playing on the dance
Mhm.
floor or whatever if you're not listening carefully. Then you realize it's praying on the dance floor, but
Interesting.
that's a few songs
Okay.
ahead.
On to track three, "Could You?" Now we
um,
get some guitars. It's a nice change of pace.
what'd you think of the end of "Careful You"? Like after this, what pretty much is a solid pop song, but then all of a sudden it just gets this weird break of like vocal sounds being sampled, and that's how the song just
It didn't
ends
really
into an
strike.
echo.
After the first song, it didn't really strike me. I was prepared for weirdness after the
Okay,
opening of chorus.
okay.
Don't even have it in my head.
You think it's going in one direction, like, oh yeah, this is just going to be a regular song, and then all of a sudden it goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. You're
Oh
just like,
yeah,
wait, what?
I was primed for weirdness when chords began.
And then you expect it to kick back, and instead it just echoes out with that weird sample. Like, that's an odd choice.
Track onto track three, Could You? We got some guitars finally. Very nice change of
Yes.
pace. And the vocal is very sort of country rock on this one.
It's very birds.
Well, it's very birds. There's a
Yeah.
12 string in the chorus that completely reminds me of Roger McGuinn. And it's 60s pop
Yeah.
with this kind of country rock vocal. His vocal contortions are amazing.
Yeah, this one might be my favorite off the album, actually, even though it is very. I don't understand why this wasn't more of a single, but it wasn't for some reason.
It is very kind of upbeat and poppy.
Yeah.
And there's some synth horns on the instrumental section. I don't even know if it's a solo per se, that were very surprising because it's very 60s, very 12-string guitar pop. And then we get these synth horns and these vibes and
Were there
keys
real
later on.
horns mixed in with the keys though?
There could have been real horns in there, given all the horn players. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I think they. I mean, because I know there were keys, I know there were synth
Yeah.
horns, but I think there were like a
There probably
combination.
were some real horns mixed in, yeah. And then on later choruses, they bring in the vibes and the more keys, which was
Yeah.
interesting. They kind of really develop it halfway through.
Like,
it
isn't there
becomes
even like a
different
little bit
song.
of a flute in here too? Like when it gets low, when it gets.
Possibly there is a flute player listed.
Yeah.
I just wasn't prepared for all these horns and synthesizers on this very kind of classic 60s pop song. Like early 60s pop song. On to track 4, Happy Idiot.
This was the like the lead single.
Okay. This is just 80s synth pop with a bass line that is very Joy Division.
Oh yeah, like I mean, you think the music's very upbeat, but there's this real melancholy guitar line played throughout.
There's a bass part that is straight out of Peter Cook. I mean, I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if they sampled him.
Yeah.
And the chorus reminded me, and this is going to throw back for us, but Special Ed by Stephen Lynch.
Oh.
Talking about waving at cars.
Oh
because
yeah,
he's
you're
a happy
right.
idiot. Beating his head against the wall because he just wants to be stupid. He doesn't
I
want.
have not thought of Stephen Lynch in a long
Yeah.
time. I wonder whatever happened to that guy.
Last I knew, he did a Broadway version of The Wedding Singer.
Oh, that's right.
And he's still around. I mean, I don't know exactly.
He has to be.
He kind of went a little mainstream. Look him up on Spotify. He's written some very interesting songs,
Yeah.
specifically Special Ed. And Kill a Kitten. Gotta recommend Kill a Kitten.
Yeah.
But that whole bit about waving at cars and wanting to beat his head against the wall, because basically he's choosing to be happy and stupid.
Right.
And it just reminded me of Special Ed. And I loved the guitar solo at the end, because proper guitar solos are kind of at a premium on this album.
Yeah.
Zach doesn't like to really show off too much. On to track 5, another abrupt change. Test Pilot.
It's a basic old school soul song, really.
Well, yeah, but there are some really weird samples that remind me of Radiohead.
Well, yeah, it's a soul song with a lot of keyboard texturing in the background and sampling going over it.
There are just some bizarre, kind of scary samples that are very Radiohead. Some nice syncopation between the drums and vocals. And some really loud guitar that is like straight out of Creep. That hit in the chorus of Creep. Love the harmonies on verse 2. Basically, the verse is completely harmonized the second time that melody comes around. And there's actually a sound effects solo.
Oh yeah. I think that, like I said, there's a few on this where they get into you expect a solo, and it's just either sound effects or samples.
But they didn't do that till track 5. I figured that would be more of a thing when I heard the first song.
Yeah.
They held it off till track 5 at a proper sound effects solo. Track 6, Love Stained. Love that title.
So you got your single snare to begin it.
Yeah. Loved the groove on this one, and I loved the nice soft vocal.
Right, the vocals they be at least in the beginning they're minimal. They're hardly even there, and then all of a sudden they're not.
And there's some great harmonies on the second verse.
Right.
All of my notes are really just about the vocals on this one.
And just tons of slow and loud fuzz
Yeah, yeah.
completely behind it. I could, you could easily hear St. Vincent doing this
Mhm.
one.
Well, she's very much in the same vein as these guys, at
Yeah.
least from this album. It's that merging of rock and electronics.
Yeah.
On to track 9, Ride. The piano really caught me off guard. With
It's
all the
a
synthesizers and loops and everything, I was not expecting a nice acoustic piano.
like the intro is a very like Smashing Pumpkins style intro. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
it breaks into this piano. Like it has a very we're an American band feel to it, which
Okay.
the Pumpkins also
Yeah,
covered
yeah.
too.
And I like the sort of old sounding melody that's sampled. Like it
Yeah.
sounds like an old recording.
Yeah, I guess it does. The rest of the album does have like a very clean feel to it, but this is more.
I think as the album actually at this point is where next song is where I get a little tired of that, where they use these samples that sound like they're pulled off of old vinyl, and it just gets a little old. But it's nice at this point.
Yeah.
And then it comes into this groove in the middle of the song that's very 90s pop rock, completely unexpected because the very beginning is very slow.
Yeah.
And I was surprised it wasn't an instrumental because the vocals don't come in until like 4 minutes in.
Well, right, yeah, it was kind of like, oh, this one's. I didn't realize this one's like 6.5 minutes, and it's because they
Nobody
don't
sings
really
until
get
like
to it.
maybe 3 minutes. I don't know. And the vocals on the chorus remind me a lot of Eddie Grant.
Oh wow,
He
that's
goes
another one I
very
haven't
Eddie
thought
Grant
of in a long
on the
time.
chorus. I hadn't until I heard that vocal, and I was like, "Wait, that
I
sounds
wonder if
like
he
Eddie
was any
Grant."
relation to Amy Grant.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just really surprising to hear that kind of a voice. But yeah, I also haven't thought of Eddie Grant in a long time.
I wonder if they covered each other's stuff. That would be pretty funny.
These guys covering Electric Avenue could be interesting.
I was thinking of Eddie Grant doing Baby Baby.
Well, on to track 9 right now.
They're kind of at their most Prince here.
I was thinking the descending, vibes, or vibraphone is the name of the instrument, kind of like a xylophone for by vibes. There's a descending vibe part at the beginning that reminds me of the Beach Boys.
Right, you really are kind of like, how does that intro fit in with the song until they kind of bring it back into the breakdowns, back
But yeah, it is very Prince. And Sunday sounds different again. He does a falsetto on this one that's very Bowie.
Right.
And it's probably okay.
This is the one lyrically where you think you're in a pop song, and it gets very existential.
But musically, it's probably the most straightforward on the album.
Yes.
It's just a straight up pop song. It doesn't really take any weird twists except for that beginning, which they bring back later. That's a little Beach Boys, and we get a little Bowie, and you mentioned Prince, and yeah. It's just kind of the interesting thing about these guys. They're really all over the map stylistically.
When you think you've got them figured out, then they don't swerve. You're like, wait, what? You're just gonna stick with this? Yeah, okay. And then, right, when you think you're in completely uncharted territory, is when they get to track 9, Winter.
Yes.
Like, oh, this is very much like old TV on the radio.
Well, okay, because my first two notes are I couldn't use English. Very guitar glam rock. Because it's just as loud, like, who did rock and roll? Gary Glitter, guitar part coming in. And it's just very glam rock. Another track where Tunde sounds like Gabriel.
Yeah.
And although I don't know if the hip hop drums really fit.
Yeah,
it was kind of a hip hop drum groove with this glam rock guitar. It was an interesting combination, but I don't know if it really worked for me. This is the point where all the loops and samples were getting a little tiresome, particularly because they all sounded vinyl and kind of had a little bit of hiss. And I was getting a little. It was just a little overdone for me. And then on to track 10, The Antidote, Laser Ray.
Now this is really like older stuff. This, in fact, like there's old songs they've done like "Wolf Like Me" and "Halfway Home"
Okay.
that sound a lot like this too.
This is very Ramones punk. Straightforward Ramones influence. And he sounds very different again. Like I said, it's punk. He goes very nasal.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tunde I'm talking about. My favorite of the album, definitely. Just a straight up funk song.
Oh yeah.
I'm getting tired of the electronics, so it was just nice to have just guitar and vocals and bass and drums.
And there's like, but yet there's still a complexity to it. There's like a few. It sounds to me like there's a few different guitar lines being played at the
Oh,
same
probably,
time.
yeah. There's like three
Giving it
guitar players in the band.
right, giving this weird effect of just like these three different things going on at the same time, yet playing the same song.
Yeah. And it all works, and it on the surface it does sound just like a straightforward punk song, but
Yeah.
it just layers in nicely. On to track 11, another drastic
Something
left
completely
turn.
different.
Yes.
They should have the old timey record scratch, between the two.
But before Laser Ray and then before Trouble, the song on number 11, the acoustic guitar was very surprising.
Right.
The last thing I expected from these guys was acoustic guitar.
It's like an acoustic ballad, but with a drum machine, though.
Yeah, with electronic drums, which is a very interesting contrast. And then they brought the loops and samples back for the chorus.
Yeah, and I always wondered if they were unironic in their use of the lyric, "Don't worry, be happy."
I think they were maybe just kind of taking a little dig at it.
But they were also approaching with a sense of dread.
Yeah. Because they're probably about our age, right?
Yeah.
So they remember when that song was just so fucking annoyingly done to death.
You couldn't escape it. It was
Right,
one of
so,
those songs.
So there's always that temptation whenever you have a chance to just take a little shot at it, even though it was 30 years ago. On to track 12, the final song of the album, the title track, Seeds. This is just vocals and bass synth for the first verse and chorus, which is fascinating.
Right. And he goes full on Gabriel here.
Yeah.
They're probably at their most Gabriel I've ever heard them, actually.
Mm-hmm. At least until the second verse where they bring the loops and samples back. And although it does have this nice big anthemic chorus, which was nice.
And I kind of wonder about and I've given this criticism before about track ordering, and it's kind of with this, like maybe having the ballad before this doesn't really. I don't know.
No, I think this is a nice outro. It's a nice sparse way to go out.
This is definitely the end song of the album, because I mean it really, when it hits that crescendo, it really goes with it.
But yeah, Trouble earlier would have been better, because Laser Ray into this would have been a really nice
juxtaposition. Exactly.
Go for the punk song into the really sparse Gabriel-esque ballad, and move the acoustic thing somewhere in the middle.
I mean, Trouble actually might even be my pick for the weakest on the album if I had to pick one. But
I don't know if I have a weakest per se. There are obviously points where the samples got tired, but actually, if I had to pick one, the acoustic one. I would have preferred it if it just stayed acoustic.
Yeah.
If they just committed to the acoustic ballad, I would have preferred
it. Which is strange. I mean, you want to see somebody play with it, but
Yeah. And I don't really have any more notes on Seeds.
Let's see. Yes. Oh, the soundscape and the harmonies. Oh, yeah, this. Yeah, I changed my mind in mid notes that Seeds was my favorite of the album.
Okay. It's certainly one of the most interesting, and very Gabriel, which I can see why it would be your favorite, of course. And on to recommendations. Obviously, you picked this one, so you recommend it.
Yeah.
And I definitely recommend it. Like I said, I got a little tired of some of it, but just for Tunde Adebimpe's vocal contortions and transformations, it's worth it. The guy, he's got to be one of the most fascinating singers I've ever heard. He can. There's
Yeah,
nothing he can't do.
I hope you check out.
I
This
definitely
was
will
your
be checking out
first.
some more of their stuff. Yeah, I'd heard of them years ago, and I'd maybe checked out a song or two here or there, but never really, like I said with Mitski, I never really did a deep dive.
They never really. I think they really deserved a lot more than they got. I mean,
Uh-huh.
they had some good press, but I mean, they airplay for them is very few and far between.
Well, because they're very progressive.
Like this Sirius XM on the alternative channel will occasionally play something from them here and there. Not much off this album. This album got ignored pretty.
Mhm.
Happy Idiot got some play from them, but
Radio doesn't like artists who are hard to categorize.
right.
I'm convinced that way. That's why Saint Vincent is kind of still a little bit unknown.
Yeah.
She hasn't gone huge yet because she's a bit hard to categorize. So and then these guys certainly fell prey to that.
Yeah.
Um, just one last note, completely unrelated to TV on the radio, because I said they're progressive. I was reminded of something I realized recently, music related. I've been kind of diving back into Mr. Mister, particularly Welcome to the Real World. I like a handful of songs on it. There are a
I
handful of
did
songs I
like
really
that
like.
album back in the day, sure, yeah.
And I realized how I can describe them. They were a prog band who wanted to get paid.
Well, all that was the thing with the 80s. All the prog bands were getting paid then, and
Like
they were really desperate for
you
them.
could tell they wanted to go really prog, but they also wanted to get paid like a pop band. So they kind of reined it in.
Hey,
It's kind of fascinating.
how do they stack up with TV on the radio,
Oh,
actually?
please.
Because, I mean, pop and prog kind of together, you know?
Well, no, I think if they had the technology, because I can't remember his name, but the keyboard player did pull out some interesting sounds.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, but if you really listen to that album, particularly some of the album tracks, I mean, Kyrie and Broken Wings, great songs, got horribly overplayed.
Right.
But if you check out some of the album songs, Uniform of Youth and Into My Own Hands are my two favorites. There are definitely prog leanings. And they were session guys who could play the hell out of their instruments.
Right.
They're all great players. And Pat Mastelotto went on to be in Crimson.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Pat Mastelotto was the second drummer in Crimson. The drum you didn't know that.
No, I did not. The drummer for Mr. Mister went on to be the
play in
drummer
Crimson when they had that whole double trio thing going for a while with two drummers.
Huh.
And Trey
All right.
Gunn and it was Trey Gunn and Tony Levin on bass, two drummers. I think it may have been Bruford and Pat Mastelotto, and then Baloo and Fripp. It was a double trio.
Okay.
The second drummer was the guy from Mr. Mister.
I'd love to see these guys play with Crimson.
Yeah. So it occurred to me, like, Mr. Mister was a band who could have been and probably wanted to play prog, but also wanted to make money. So they played pop. They kind of watered it down to pop. Anyway, enough of that tangent. That's it for Seeds by TV on the Radio. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't. Until next time, we'll be reviewing Here's to the Fatigue by Prestamico.
Let me plug my I'm working on a different Spotify playlist, but of course I have the one of the best cover playlists on Spotify called the Playlist of Unoriginality.
Give me a link, I'll put it down in the description.
Based on a show I used to do back in the day of just an hour of covers. Of course, you just put the thing on random and it's like you're listening to that all over again.
And I mentioned, I teased my description of Prestamico.
Yes.
Imagine if Rush was backing up One Dimension. Or One Direction, I'm sorry. Rush backing up One Direction.
That's even better.
but with, like, Raven era Yes harmonies.
Okay.
So pop melodies, choral harmonies, and music that mixes metal, prog, and alternative. That's next time. Of course, until then, always remember, never forget, wherever you go in life, there you are.
You are.